Hello, and welcome to lecture number 9 for English 421Y. In this lecture, I want to focus on the research process for gathering sources to use in your incident analysis report. Other reports you might have written, the range of sources you are permitted to use for this project will be much broader and include everything from other technical reports and white papers, to newspapers, blogs, documentaries, journal articles, social media posts, infographics, magazine articles, and much more. Not only is it okay to use non-traditional sources like blog posts or tweets, depending on your topic, this might actually produce the most reliable and relevant sources of information. The critical point I want to make is that you need to be prepared to defend your choices and explain why a particular source deserves to be cited. Not just what information you got from it, but why that source in particular meets your criteria for credible, unbiased, and interesting research. In this lecture, I will focus on 4 strategies that will help you get the most out of your research. In addition, I will reference a document that I added to Blackboard entitled Incident Analysis Example, which walks through a topic I chose back in August 2015 to illustrate the research process for this project. I also strongly suggest looking at the sample projects from students in previous semesters that I've included in the sample projects folder. So here's the incident analysis example. The first strategy that I recommend for doing research is to move from broad to specific sources. Start as broad as possible and quickly narrow your focus based on what you found in initial sources. Looking at the example that I posted on Blackboard, you can see that I began my research into the Gold King mine disaster by looking at Google News and Wikipedia, both of which pointed me towards other sources and helped me decide what aspects of the incident to research further. It's important to note that I didn't stop here, and if I had written a full report, these initial sources would not have been cited. Why? It's because they are part of the critical early stages of research, where I am more concerned with learning and asking questions than with finding things to cite. As I see it, research like this often occurs in roughly 3 stages: what I call pre-search, which I know is a dumb title, narrowing research, and the final sources used in your work cited. Pre-search helpfully describes the earliest stage of the process when you aren't quite sure of the topic or focus and simply need to find sources that will help you decide what to research next. Starting as broad as possible with Wikipedia or news articles is useful in the pre-search stage because if you don't know what, say, the Gold King mine disaster is, reading a Chicago Tribune article about it can be very helpful just to get the background information on what the incident is, what happened, who it impacted, that kind of thing. As you can see just from reading the first paragraph of the Chicago Tribune article, it references the Environmental Protection Agency's own report. So already you can see just by, and there's a lot of ads of course, just by reading a single sort of top level source in a national newspaper, it's immediately pointing me towards other resources. Those resources are cited by the Chicago Tribune, so I can then go to those sources and use them rather than using the Chicago Tribune's more sort of general, non-specialized assessment of it. Wikipedia is also useful for giving you search terms, for pointing you towards resources. If you go to the bottom page of a Wikipedia, usually it'll have its list of sources. But most of the time you wouldn't actually cite Wikipedia because it's a non-specialized general overview rather than the actual specialized technical information, which is what we want to get in a technical report. The second type of research is what I call narrowing research. And it begins once you have a topic and have started to move away from these broad or general sources and towards specialized information that is created by experts. That includes primary sources by those with first-hand experience. As the name implies, narrowing sources help you narrow towards useful information, decide what is important or relevant, and cut out anything that doesn't meet your criteria. While they can be cited, Narrowing sources often point towards other information that is more useful. For my research on the Gold King mine disaster, an article in the Denver Post helped me get more narrow from the Chicago Tribune. It's not a national newspaper, but it's a regional newspaper. And because they reference more specific cities and smaller organizations, community groups that the Chicago Tribune would not really have been interested in. And so this article really, really helped me understand better what I was looking at. For instance, it references specific cities within Colorado and the Animas River, which is the actual river that was polluted in this situation. It also references a organization, like a community group, that had done sort of local efforts to clean the Animas River. So these terms like Animas River, mine blowout, and things like that gave me the idea to focus on the long-term impact that mining had in the Animas River area. Just reading the Chicago Tribune article or the Wikipedia page would not necessarily have gotten me there. Each of these points led to another deeper and more specific round of research that I would not have gotten to if I hadn't narrowed first. Final sources, then, the third category, are those that are specialized and present a perspective or angle that is not really available anywhere else. You're not going to get it in the Chicago Tribune. You're not going to get it in the Denver Post because it's very specific. Most importantly, these sources have been evaluated and determined to be credible, useful, and interesting by you, the researcher. You are sort of putting your neck out and saying, yeah, this information is useful and important and credible for these reasons. Somebody might challenge you on it and say, why are you including a tweet in this technical report? And you'll say, well, social media actually played an important role in my incident, etc., etc. These are the sources you will actually want to cite in your report, and they're often impossible to find without first doing pre-search and narrowing research. Because you are finding these using search terms that you found in your pre-search and using broader articles that you found in your narrowing research, you just won't get them on an initial Google search or something like that. You just won't. With my Gold King mine research, the final sources that I simply would not have found without considerable legwork were the Bureau of Reclamation's technical report, the Animas River Stakeholder Group, and the High Country News blog post. So this report, which was mentioned a couple times in summary, but the actual report itself, I had to do a little digging to find. Then this group, this York Water, Colorado blog, which has a great article about it. And then the Animas River Stakeholder Group, which is the community organization that I mentioned previously that is specifically focused on this one river rather than on broader conservation or something like that. All of these sources did not show up on initial Google searches. They were not cited in my initial round of pre-search. They were not things that I knew about because they required levels of specialized knowledge. I had to be familiar with the topic to understand that the EPA was investigating it, that the EPA itself was being investigated, that there was a group called the Animas River Stakeholder Group, that there were specific blogs dedicated to water conservation and fighting water pollution in Colorado, which I'm not from Colorado and I've only been there once, so I would not have known about these because I'm not a local citizen. All of these sources proved to be the best evidence for the argument that I would make if I were to write a full analysis in my report. Thinking about research as three interrelated steps shows that you can't just move from pre-search to final sources, or from narrowing sources to final sources, or just have final sources, without first finding things that will help you get towards that more specialized and detailed knowledge. It's not always a perfectly linear process, however. Sometimes you get to your narrowing sources and realize that your initial pre-search wasn't actually helpful and you need to go back and restart. But all three stages are interconnected and you need to use all three of them. I've come up with a useful diagram here that will help you. You can see these arrows. Pre-search leads to narrowing, which leads to final sources. They're interlocking. You can't break them apart. This is one long arrow that has been separated artificially into 3 steps. That's the way that I want you to think about how you are doing research. So the second thing that I want to talk about is evaluating your sources. You need to get in the habit of evaluating sources before using them rather than using everything you find. Simply put, not everything you find should be cited. And when you include a source in your research, you aren't simply using the information it contains. You are also making a statement about the credibility, veracity, and relevance of its contents. For instance, if you cite a blog that has been widely discredited because one reason or another, you are taking on the ethos of that blog. That's why you need to be very careful about looking and actually tracking down where information comes from. You don't always have to agree with your sources, and it's certainly possible to reference something and be critical of it. However, if you hold a source up as evidence, then you are also vouching for its credibility and connecting your professional ethos to that of the authors. If you have any reservations about the source, where it came from, what it contains, who created it, when it was published, how it has been received by others, etc., then you should perform a cost-benefit analysis and decide what value it provides. This becomes incredibly important when you work for an organization where that organization literally is connecting itself to another organization's credibility. An example from my research of a source I evaluated is the article on the Animas River Stakeholder Group from the Your Colorado Water blog. This article is from a blog and has a clear anti-mining bias. That is, they are against the mining industry in Colorado. However, I chose to use it because it offers a perspective absent in any of the other documents I used, particularly the EPA and the Bureau of Reclamation reports, which barely mention the community that was impacted by the release of wastewater into the Animas River, and might have a more pro-mining perspective. If someone challenged my choice to include this blog as a source, I would be prepared to explain why I believe it is credible and how I am using it to balance viewpoints found in other sources. The third strategy for using sources is to find contrasting views. It might be counterintuitive to find a view that is different from your own and to use that in your report, but this is important when dealing with a topic that has led to clearly established political positions or factions that might lead to biased information. If you yourself have a bias, let's say I was actually pro-mining, if I include an anti-mining source and those perspectives, I am balancing out my argument so that somebody who was anti-mining couldn't come in and immediately discredit or disprove or attack everything that I'm saying. It's a conversation, though. So you want to include multiple perspectives without necessarily saying, well, anti-mining is better and pro-mining is worse. You need to have them both there and let your reader kind of make up their own mind. If you include only sources from one side of an issue that has multiple sides, you can be accused of perpetuating the biases of those sources. If I didn't include any anti-mining perspectives, someone could say, oh, well, you are pro-mining, if that makes sense. If you contrast multiple perspectives in different sources, you both avoid the pitfall of bias and allow your analysis to focus on why and how different viewpoints developed. For example, many of the national sources I found rightfully blame the EPA for the Gold King mine disaster, but many sources seize a political opportunity to critique the EPA, a who watches the watchman argument, if you will, or they make Gold King sound like an isolated incident that could have easily been prevented. The blog post from High Country News argues that this particular spill, and here's that particular article, argues that this particular spill was bad, but it's only the latest environmental catastrophe in the area and really just a symptom of a much larger and more complex problem. The two viewpoints are contrasting, and while each might have biases, by analyzing both, I avoid simply repeating their arguments without offering any of my own kind of analysis or opinion on the topic. Finally, record and cite everything. I present this document to you because I might not, in my final report, cite all of this. As I said, Wikipedia and Chicago Tribune, I wouldn't necessarily cite, but I'm recording them, and I'm taking notes about them. And I'm using them as sort of a paper trail, so that if someone asked me, how did you find the High Country News, I can say, oh, well, you know, it was mentioned, the Animas River Stakeholder Group was mentioned in this one article in the Denver Post, and then I did a Google search on that and found the High Country News, which then led me to the Animas River Stakeholder Group, that kind of thing. While research varies widely across disciplines, in almost every career or industry, you need to be able to collect and present the information that you are using as evidence. That is why it's invaluable to come up with some kind of system for taking notes and citing information from sources while in the middle of conducting research. If all you do is collect all the sources that you used at the end, you could lose something. You're potentially opening yourself up to not being able to defend your choices, that kind of thing. So finally, I want to conclude this lecture by talking a little bit about collaboration. There is a collaboration guide on Blackboard that distinguishes between cooperative writing, where everyone works on separate parts and then one person edits them together at the end, and collaborative writing, where everyone begins with one part and then trades so that no one person is responsible for writing, editing, revising, and planning one section of the entire document. The primary benefit of truly collaborative writing is that everyone examines and analyzes and contributes to every part of the document. One person might write a section, another person might rewrite it and revise it, a third person might edit it and proofread it, maybe the first person will go back and make sure the citations and the page design are correct. By making sure that everyone is involved in writing, editing, revising, and drafting and planning the entire document, rather than one person writes, edits, and revises their own section, you get a truly collaborative effort. Similarly, you should never assign research to just one person. If everyone is involved in finding sources, then you will get a greater variety and volume of information than you would if one person is assigned the research component. So let's say everyone finds 4 sources, then you collect them and decide, do we have enough information? Where did we overlap? And then everyone finds another 2 sources, and then you decide, okay, well, we found enough interesting perspectives, you evaluate them and decide what you actually have. Simply put, all of your names are on the entire report. All of your names are on the title page. So everyone should be researching, writing, and editing for the entire paper. It's not, I will not accept that was so-and-so's job or that wasn't my section as an excuse for why one section was not good. This would not cut it in a department or a laboratory or a job, so it's not an acceptable excuse here. While it might be more work to do truly collaborative writing, the finished product will be far more cohesive and consistent as a result of strong communication, collaboration, and careful balancing of responsibilities. I also think that the traditional cooperative view of writing, where everyone works separately and then you stitch it together at the end, that tends to put more emphasis on work at the end of the process, whereas collaborative writing tends to put more emphasis on work at the beginning of the process, where you need to break everything up and decide who's doing what and how you're splitting things so that everyone contributes equally to the whole report. So in the end, I think it ends up being about the same amount of work, just you're shifting where that work happens, which I think it's better to have more planning at the beginning than to scramble at the end to make sure that everything is getting done. This is why I'm requiring you to include the table that I added to an announcement on the Blackboard homepage with the first draft of your report. So going to the home page, you'll see the table here. You don't have to use this exact table. You can modify it to fit your own needs and revise it to include the actual structure, but you can see it has the different sections, the different jobs that you need to do. Then it has the different stages across time, the planning stage, the drafting stage, the revising stage, and the editing stage, and then it shows who's doing this. So if person 1 is planning, or person 2 and 3 are planning, person 3 would then draft, person 1 would then revise, person 2 would then edit, that kind of thing. This makes it so that no one person is doing all 4 stages for one report. Finally, for true collaboration to occur, everyone must be directly involved in all stages. Everyone must decide this in advance. This is why by the time you submit your first report draft, you should be able to fill out this table. I won't expect it for the proposals, but I will expect it with the first draft report on April 21st. Truly collaborative writing is the goal here. It will take time. It will take some effort, but that is ultimately the kind of writing that you'll see in a lot of organizations where, individual contributors' names aren't even on the cover page. It just says written by this organization or whatever. That's it for today. Good luck with developing your drafts of your report.